The moon had always watched us in silence, hanging above the world like an unblinking eye, older than memory and patient beyond time, and on the night everything changed. It was fuller than it had been in decades, swollen with a pale glow that seemed too deliberate to be natural, as if it were leaning closer to listen. I was standing alone on the ridge outside the city, where the lights thinned and the sky reclaimed its authority, and for the first time in my life I felt the sensation that the universe was not empty but crowded, layered, alive with attention. The stars were sharp and numerous, the Milky Way stretched like a scar across the heavens, and somewhere within that vast spill of light lay the Pleiades, the small tight cluster humans had mythologized for thousands of years, calling them sisters, calling them seeds, calling them home without ever understanding why the word felt true in their mouths. That was when the first craft appeared, not tearing through the sky like the movies promised, not roaring or burning, but simply being there, as if it had always existed and I had only just been granted permission to notice it. It was a smooth oval silhouette against the moon's glow, darker than the darkness around it, and it moved without effort, sliding sideways, then stopping, then drifting again in a way that made gravity feel like a suggestion rather than a rule. As I watched, a second light emerged, then a third, each one phasing into visibility like thoughts forming in the mind of the cosmos itself, and I understood with a calm certainty that fear had no place here because fear was a human reflex and this was something older and more precise. The air around me changed, thickening, humming at a frequency I felt in my chest rather than heard with my ears, and suddenly the moon was no longer just the moon. Its surface shimmered, the familiar craters rearranging themselves into geometric patterns, lines and angles surfacing beneath the illusion of stone, and I realized that what humanity had worshipped, measured, walked upon, and abandoned was not a dead rock but a sentinel, a constructed intelligence wrapped in dust and myth, a relay station anchored in orbit to observe a species still deciding whether it would destroy itself or evolve beyond fear. The craft above me responded to the moon's shift, aligning themselves in a slow spiral, and then the ground beneath my feet vibrated gently, not violently but with intention, like a door being unlocked from the other side. Light unfolded in front of me, a corridor rather than a beam, and stepping into it felt less like being taken and more like remembering a path I had walked before. The stars blurred, the earth curved away, and the galaxy opened itself not as distance but as depth, layers folding into one another until I could feel the vastness of it pressing against my awareness. We passed the moon and I saw it clearly then, not as humans see it but as it truly was, its surface a skin-concealing vast luminous chambers, ancient machinery humming softly, built not by conquest but by consensus among civilizations that understood the value of patience. The moon had been placed there millions of years ago, long before the first human looked up and wondered, positioned deliberately to stabilize Earth, to seed tides, to regulate climate, and to observe the slow emergence of consciousness on a world that had potential but no guidance. Beyond the moon the stars grew brighter, closer, and the familiar patterns humans had drawn into constellations dissolved into something far more complex. We moved toward the Pleiades, and the sensation was not travel but translation, like turning a page rather than crossing a distance. The cluster expanded around us, each star burning with a sharp blue-white clarity, and between them hung structures of light, vast and delicate, woven rather than built, existing partially in dimensions humans had no language for. This was where they came from, the beings humans had reduced to caricatures and fear, calling them little green men because it was easier to laugh than to understand. They were small, yes, their bodies compact and efficient, the skin tinted green not as a cosmetic accident but as an adaptation to light frequencies different from those of Earth, and their eyes were large not to frighten but to perceive layers of reality invisible to human vision. They did not speak with mouths but with thought, and when they reached into my awareness there was no intrusion, only an offering, a gentle alignment of meaning that unfolded like a story I had always known. They explained without words that humanity was not alone and never had been, that consciousness was a field rather than a fluke, arising wherever conditions allowed and sometimes where they did not. They showed me worlds where intelligence grew in oceans of gas, in crystalline lattices, in magnetic storms, and they showed me Earth as it had been watched, catalogued, and protected, nudged away from extinction events not to control but to preserve possibility. Then came the tall whites, emerging from the light like elongated shadows solidifying into form, their presence calm and composed, their bodies tall and slender, the skin pale not from lack of pigment but from exposure to starlight filtered through technologies older than human civilization. They moved slowly, deliberately, and when they regarded me I felt the weight of deep time, of species that measured progress in millennia rather than years. They had walked among humans before, discreetly, advising, correcting, withdrawing when influence became interference, always balancing on the edge of revelation and restraint. They showed me memories of ancient encounters, of early humans mistaking them for gods, of knowledge given too quickly leading to collapse rather than enlightenment, and of the long decision to step back, to let humanity stumble, to learn through error, to develop ethics alongside technology rather than in its shadow. The UFOs humans reported were not invasions or experiments but check-ins, calibrations, quiet observations to assess whether the species had reached the threshold where truth would inspire growth rather than panic. As we moved deeper into the galaxy, the scale of it became overwhelming, not in size but in intelligence. The galaxy was not a collection of stars but a living network, civilizations linked by shared principles rather than borders, bound by a prime directive not of silence but of timing. Every emerging species was given space to find itself, to wrestle with fear, with power, with identity, and only when it demonstrated a willingness to see itself as part of a larger whole was it invited fully into the conversation. I was shown Earth's current moment from a perspective stripped of politics and noise, a species at a crossroads, armed with technologies capable of annihilation yet haunted by an intuition that cooperation was the only path forward. The moon's recent increase in activity, the rising sightings, the soft disclosure leaking through culture and science, were not accidents but preparations, a gradual loosening of the veil to allow the idea of non-human intelligence to become familiar before it became undeniable. The little green beings, the tall whites, and others whose forms defied human description were not united by appearance but by intention, and that intention was simple and profound, to invite humanity to mature. There would be no grand landing on government lawns, no conquest, no salvation from the sky, only an opening, a choice. The galaxy would not solve human problems but it would no longer pretend to be absent. When the journey reversed, when the stars folded back into the familiar sky and the moon resumed its mask of stone and shadow, I found myself once again on the ridge, the city lights flickering below, the night quiet except for the distant sound of life continuing unaware. The craft were gone, or perhaps merely unseen, and the moon looked the same as it always had, beautiful and distant and deceptively simple. But I was not the same. The silence of the universe no longer felt empty but intentional, a pause rather than an absence, and when I looked up at the Pleiades, now just a small cluster to the naked eye, I felt a quiet recognition, like seeing the lights of a distant home. Somewhere above and beyond, little green beings moved through structures of light, tall whites observed the slow arc of human progress, and the moon continued its patient watch, waiting for the moment when humanity would finally look up not with fear or worship, but with understanding. And when that moment came, the galaxy would answer, not with thunder or spectacle, but with the simple acknowledgement that we had always been part of something vast, something alive, and something that had been waiting for us to grow into ourselves.